You're standing at the edge of everything you think you know. The pyramids are 4,500 years old. The wheel is 5,500 years old. Writing, cities, agriculture, all of it starts within the last 12,000 years. And you, modern, thinking, tool-using you, have been walking this planet for roughly 300,000 years. That leaves a gap, a 288,000-year gap where something should have happened. And the question no one seems willing to ask out loud is this: what if it did? Here is what the history books tell you. Your ancestors spent the vast majority of human existence as hunter-gatherers. Simple, nomadic, surviving. Then, around 12,000 years ago, something clicked. The agricultural revolution began. Civilization erupted almost simultaneously across the globe, in the Fertile Crescent, along the Indus River, beside the Yellow River, in the jungles of Mesoamerica. Within a few thousand years, you had writing, mathematics, monumental architecture, and astronomy precise enough to track the movements of stars your naked eye can barely detect. It sounds like a story of slow, inevitable progress. But there is a detail that has always bothered the scientists willing to look closely. The jump is too fast. In 2008, archaeologist Klaus Schmidt published his landmark findings on Göbekli Tepe, a site in modern-day Turkey that rewrote the timeline of human civilization almost overnight. The structure dates back 11,600 years and is composed of massive T-shaped limestone pillars arranged in complex, intentional geometric patterns. The pillars are carved with animals: foxes, vultures, scorpions, abstract symbols, with a level of artistic sophistication we do not associate with hunter-gatherers. Some of the stones weigh 20 tons. There are no permanent settlements nearby. No evidence of agriculture at the site. No tools found in the soil consistent with the scale of what was built. In other words, people who were supposed to be primitive built one of the most complex architectural sites in recorded human history, without any of the things we assumed they needed. Schmidt spent decades trying to explain it. His conclusion was quietly unsettling. Göbekli Tepe was not built for survival. It was not a granary or a shelter or a market. It was built for something abstract, for ceremony, for ritual, for the kind of meaning that only complex, organized, self-aware societies feel the need to carve into stone. And it was buried intentionally. Someone carefully filled those chambers with soil and sealed them from the outside world, as if preserving something for a future they could already sense would come, as if leaving a message for whoever came next. Think about what it means to bury something intentionally. You do not do that unless you believe someone will be here later to find it. Unless you believe something is about to go wrong, and you want what mattered to survive. Now ask the harder question. What if the people who built Göbekli Tepe were not beginning civilization? What if they were the survivors of one? This is where science becomes quietly, uncomfortably interesting. In the early 1990s, geologist Robert Schoch, a man who built his career dating rock formations, traveled to Egypt to examine the limestone enclosure surrounding the Great Sphinx of Giza. Not the sculpture itself, the pit it sits in, the walls. What he found challenged everything he thought he understood about the ancient world. The erosion on those limestone walls was not caused by wind and sand. The pattern was wrong. The direction was wrong. It was caused by water, by prolonged, heavy rainfall, by centuries of precipitation running down vertical surfaces and carving deep horizontal channels into the stone, the kind of damage that only forms over hundreds of years of consistent, significant rainfall. The last time that region of Egypt received that kind of sustained rainfall was between 7,000 and 10,500 years ago. If Schoch is correct, and his geological methodology has been argued against but never successfully refuted, then the Sphinx was carved before dynastic Egypt existed, before the pharaohs, before the civilization credited with its creation had even formed, before the history books say anyone was sophisticated enough to build anything like it. Schoch presented this evidence for 30 years. He was largely sidelined by mainstream archaeology, not because the data was wrong, but because if the data is right, the entire accepted timeline of human civilization has to be rebuilt from scratch, and the institutions built around that timeline would have to admit they were wrong about something enormous. That kind of admission is hard for any field that spent a century being certain. But here is what makes this harder to dismiss. Around 12,900 years ago, something catastrophic happened to this planet. A team of researchers led by geologist Randall Carlson, working alongside archaeologist Alan West, and a broader collaborative group spanning geology, chemistry, and astronomy, spent over a decade assembling physical evidence for what became known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. What they found is scattered across the geological record on 4 separate continents. Nanodiamonds, formed only under the extreme pressure of cosmic impact. Iridium anomalies. Iridium is rare on Earth's surface but common in space, and its presence in a geological layer almost always means something arrived from outside the atmosphere. Shocked quartz. Cosmic spherules. Tiny glass beads formed when rock is superheated to temperatures that only exist at the moment of extraterrestrial impact. All of it deposited at the same geological moment, all pointing to the same sudden, violent event. The energy released has been estimated at the equivalent of 10 billion atomic bombs. The resulting fires consumed roughly 10% of Earth's land surface. Global temperatures dropped by as much as 8 degrees Celsius within decades, triggering a sudden return to near Ice Age conditions that lasted over 1,000 years. Sea levels, already rising as glaciers melted, surged violently upward. The coastlines of every continent shifted. In some regions, the ocean moved dozens of miles inland over the course of a human lifetime. Any civilization that existed at that moment, particularly any civilization in the low-lying coastal regions where complex societies tend to form, would have been destroyed. Not gradually, suddenly, with no time to preserve what had been built. Now let all of that settle in your mind. You have a site built 11,600 years ago by people who technically should not have possessed the organizational or architectural sophistication to build it. You have geological evidence that one of the most iconic monuments on Earth may be far older than the civilization credited with creating it. And you have physical evidence of a catastrophic event 12,900 years ago that would have obliterated any complex human society existing at that time, leaving almost nothing behind that could survive 1,000 years of fire and flood and collapse. What does the shape of that picture look like? It does not look like a straight line from primitive to advanced. It looks like a cycle, like something that has happened before. And there is more. Since the 1990s, underwater archaeologists have documented submerged structures off the coast of India at Dwarka, off Japan at Yonaguni, in the waters near Cuba, along the continental shelf that was dry land at the end of the last ice age. Some of these formations are clearly natural, but some, particularly the precise geometric terracing at Yonaguni, studied for years by marine geologist Masaki Kimura, display the kind of right angles and deliberate shaping that, if found above water, would be immediately identified as human construction. They sit beneath water that rose exactly when the catastrophe would have flooded any coastal civilization out of history. None of this is proof. Science is honest enough to say that, and science is right to say it. But none of it is nothing. And here is where the strangeness becomes personal. You live in a civilization that is profoundly, structurally fragile. Your food depends on a global supply chain spanning dozens of countries. Your warmth depends on electricity. Your medicine depends on chemistry that almost no individual human being fully understands. The knowledge of how your civilization functions is not stored in any single mind or single place. It is distributed across servers and libraries and institutions and specialists. A network so vast and interconnected that almost no part of it can survive without the others. If something hit this civilization, a sufficiently large impact, a severe enough electromagnetic pulse, a cascading failure of the kind that complexity makes possible, how much of it would survive? Not just the buildings. The understanding of how the buildings were built, the physics, the engineering, the agriculture, the ability to feed 8 billion people. Your great-grandchildren, emerging from wreckage 1,000 years from now, might find the ruins of towers they could not recreate, satellites reduced to orbiting debris, foundations of data centers they would have no framework to interpret, evidence of something vast and precise and entirely silent. They would call it mythology. They would attribute it to gods. And here is the thing that should stop you: cold. Every ancient culture on Earth already does exactly that. The Greeks described Atlantis, a civilization of extraordinary sophistication, destroyed in a single catastrophic night by floods and fire from the sky. The Sumerians preserved the story of a great deluge and a survivor who was warned in advance and carried the seeds of civilization forward in a vessel built for that exact purpose. The Hindu Vedic texts describe previous yugas, vast ages of human achievement. Each one ended in destruction, each one forgotten by the world that followed. The Hopi people of North America speak of 3 worlds that came before this one, each destroyed, each forgotten by everyone except the people who carried the story forward through the collapse. Every ancient culture tells a version of the same story. A great civilization, a catastrophe, a flood, a fire from the sky. People who built things no human since has been able to explain. Mythology is what civilization looks like after it loses everything else. What if those stories are not invention? What if they are the only archive that survived? The last record of something real, compressed into narrative, because narrative was the only medium that could outlast the collapse of everything else? Consider what this means about where you're standing. Your species is 300,000 years old. You built your first known cities 12,000 years ago. Between those two facts is a gap the history books call silence, and that science is slowly, reluctantly, learning to read differently. There was something in that gap. There was a catastrophe. And there are researchers across geology, archaeology, and astronomy who have spent their careers connecting those two facts with physical evidence that grows harder to explain away with each passing year. The history you were taught is the story of what survived the fire. It is not the story of what burned. And the question that should stay with you, the one that sits quietly in the back of your mind when you look at a photograph of a city, or hold a piece of technology you could not recreate from scratch, or watch a child learn something that took humanity thousands of years to discover, is not whether a previous civilization could have risen and fallen without leaving a record you can read. The real question is why you are so certain you're the first. You are standing at the edge of everything you think you know. And what you think you know may be exactly what the last person standing in this spot believed before the sky changed.